I'll never forget the sound of my own screams echoing through the empty streets as I stumbled out of the apartment. The words, "It's over," still ringing in my ears, the shattered remains of my heart scattered all over the floor like confetti after a party that had ended in disaster. I was left with nothing but the haunting question of, how could he do this to me? How could he throw away our 5-year relationship like it meant nothing to him? But to understand how I ended up in this desperate state, you need to know how it all began. My life was a routine, a comfortable and predictable cycle of wake up, go to work, come home, watch TV, and sleep. I worked as a marketing manager in a small firm, and my boyfriend, Alex, was a freelance writer. We met in college, and our relationship had been a fairy tale, or so I thought. We would spend our weekends exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, and laughing together like we were the only two people in the world. Our friends would often joke that we were the definition of couple goals, and I would just smile and think that I was the luckiest person alive. We had our disagreements, like any couple, but we always managed to work through them, and our love for each other only seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, or so I thought. I remember the days when Alex would surprise me with my favorite coffee in the morning, and I would come home to find him cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of his famous chicken parmesan filling the entire apartment. He would tell me about his writing, his struggles, and his triumphs, and I would listen with pride, feeling like I was his biggest supporter. I thought we had it all: the love, the trust, the connection. But I guess I was wrong. One day I came home from work early, feeling exhausted and stressed out, and that's when I saw him, sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen, a look of guilt written all over his face. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But my heart was already racing with anticipation. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and I just knew, that something was wrong. "What is it?" I pressed, feeling my anxiety spiking. "I've been seeing someone else," he said, the words cutting through me like a knife, and I felt like my world was crashing down around me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to process what I was hearing, but he just shook his head and said, "I'm sorry," like that was supposed to make everything okay. As I delved deeper into the world of corporate finance, I began to notice a peculiar trend. It seemed that my former boss, the one who had so callously fired me, had a weakness for exploiting loopholes in the system. He would often boast about his ability to find and utilize these loopholes to further his own interests, and those of the company, at the expense of others. I realized that if I could find a loophole that he had overlooked, I might be able to turn the tables on him. I spent countless hours poring over financial reports, tax codes, and regulatory documents, searching for that one vulnerability that could be my ticket to revenge. And then it hit me. A small, almost imperceptible clause in the company's bylaws that seemed to have been overlooked by everyone, including my former boss. The clause stated that any executive who had been found guilty of unethical behavior could be held personally liable for any damages incurred by the company as a result of their actions. I knew that I had to tread carefully, as I didn't want to tip my hand too early. So I began to gather evidence of my former boss's wrongdoing, slowly but surely building a case against him. I started by reviewing old emails, memos, and meeting notes, looking for any instances of unethical behavior. I also reached out to former colleagues, quietly gathering testimony and statements that could be used to support my claim. As I dug deeper, I discovered a pattern of deceit and corruption that went all the way to the top. My former boss had been embezzling funds, cooking the books, and engaging in all sorts of shady dealings, all while presenting himself as a paragon of virtue to the public. I knew that I had him right where I wanted him, and I was determined to make him pay. I started to execute my plan, step by step, taking great care to cover my tracks and avoid detection. I began by anonymously leaking information to the press, dropping subtle hints about the company's wrongdoing, and watching as the media began to sniff around. I also started to quietly reach out to investors, sharing my evidence with them, and watching as they began to lose confidence in the company's leadership. As the pressure mounted, my former boss began to feel the heat. He started to make mistakes, small at first but growing more and more desperate as the days went by. I could see the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that he was being hunted, and it only fueled my determination to bring him down. I continued to apply pressure, slowly but surely tightening the noose around his neck. I filed complaints with regulatory agencies, provided testimony to investigators, and even managed to convince a few key employees to turn against him. And through it all, I remained anonymous, a ghostly figure pulling the strings from behind the scenes. My former boss was starting to unravel, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. He was making mistakes, big ones, and I was there to capitalize on every one of them. I could see the endgame approaching, the final showdown between us, and I was ready. I had my evidence, my witnesses, and my plan, and I was confident that I would emerge victorious. The slow burn of revenge was almost too delicious to bear. I had been planning this for so long, and now, finally, it was all coming together.
My former boss was about to find out what it meant to cross me, and I was going to make sure
he never forgot it. The question was, how far would I take it? Would I be content with simply bringing him down, or would I push for more? The answer, I knew, would depend on how far he was willing to fall. Asterisk. The fallout. It's been 2 years since the incident, and the consequences of my former boss's actions have been severe. The company was sued for millions, and my former boss was fired and blacklisted from the industry. His reputation was left in tatters, and he was even divorced by his wife, who couldn't take the shame and financial burden of his actions. As for me, I was hailed as a hero and a whistleblower. I received a substantial settlement from the company, which I used to start my own business. I'm now the CEO of a successful tech firm, and I've made sure to create a positive and respectful work environment for all my employees. I've also become an advocate for workplace harassment and bullying, using my platform to raise awareness and support for victims. I've spoken at conferences, written articles, and even testified before Congress to push for stronger laws and regulations to protect employees. My former boss, on the other hand, is now a shadow of his former self. He's struggled to find work, and his personal life is in shambles. He's been forced to sell his luxury home, and most of his possessions to pay off his debts.
He's a cautionary tale of what happens when you abuse your power and mistreat others. I often think about what could have been if I had just kept quiet and tolerated the abuse. But I'm proud of myself for standing up for what's right, even when it was hard. I'm proud of the person I've become and the life I've built. I'm now in a happy and healthy relationship, and I've found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in my work. I've learned that true strength comes from vulnerability and courage, and that speaking out against injustice can be incredibly empowering. I hope my story can serve as a reminder to others that they don't have to suffer in silence. They don't have to tolerate abuse or harassment. They have the power to stand up for themselves and create change. TLDR.
Ale my musimy nauczyć się na niej, aby nie popełniać tych samych błędów w przyszłości.